I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome into a special off-season edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. I'm Mike Waddell, joined as always by the coach, Jim Collins, and by a new guy. He's our man in the middle today. It's KEITH TRIBBLE, the former Florida Gator football player, UCF Director of Athletics, and for a long time, the better part of 2 decades, he was the head of the Orange Bowl. So nobody knows Florida college athletics or the bowl system any better than KEITH TRIBBLE. Nobody knows being on the sideline any better than Jimmy Collins. And guys, I'm just an old D3 football guy right here trying to hang with 2 stallions. So thanks a lot for joining us here on the North Carolina Sports Network. You have the season, okay? It can be anywhere from 12 to 15 games, depending on who you are. If you win the championship, you will have played 15 football games in college. And then the transfer portal hits. This year, 2,689 athletes into the portal. 1,679 have found a home, meaning that 62% landed, 38% did not. You then have December signing day, where you're trying to sign some kids from the high school ranks. 43 postseason games. That includes the 3 games of the college football playoff. Michigan wins the national title. You know, hail to the victors valiant. Harbaugh back to the NFL with the Chargers. Silly season starts with the coaching carousel. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. February signing day. Remember that? It's almost a forgotten thing these days because the best players are signing in December. Then you have spring practice, where we are right now for a lot of schools. Summer workouts, fall camp, and the season begins again. I guess my whole push right there is that on average, between 500 and 600 head to assistant coaches change jobs every year in the FBS. But this year you have head coaches, UCLA Chip Kelly, going to Columbus to be a coordinator with Ryan Day and the Buckeyes. You have Sean Elliott out of the group of 5 at Georgia State, and the Panthers head coach now going back to his home state of South Carolina, where he'll be a Gamecock once again. He was formerly under Coach Steve Spurrier, as you know, Jim Collins, right there in Columbia, and then later on became the head coach when the head ball coach decided to step aside. My question here, guys, is this is not like anything that you two played or coached or administrated in over the course of your careers. It really does seem like as much of a mess as you could dream up, this is even worse.
What we're doing now is not sustainable. I refer to where we are. I try to use this analogy when people ask me about it. And I say, when you get up in the morning and you put toothpaste on your toothbrush and too much comes out onto the brush and it drops into the sink and you lose it, you can't put it back in the tube. Well, where we are in college athletics right now is we've used too much toothpaste and we cannot get it back into the tube at this point in time. I don't have the answers. Obviously, a lot of people a lot smarter than me can't come up with the answers on how to fix it either. Keith?
You know, I wasn't surprised when Chip left UCLA. A lot of folks asked me, said, well, what do you think? Why would if you look at the scenario just with UCLA, and going back to what Coach said, you have a program that's reportedly $36 million in the hole. They haven't figured out the whole NIL, and that's surprising to me, the seeing that you're in California, where you would think you would get a lot of opportunity for NILs.
Exactly.
They've struggled for years, football-wise and programmatically. They've struggled. So you have to evaluate. You're a successful coach like Chip, and you say, it's better for me to be in a place like Ohio State, which has the resources, it's constantly is in the top 5 or 6 of the country. And I've accomplished everything. I've been on the pro level, and so forth. Why do I have to go through this? It's changed. Guys who've been in it longer, coaches who've been in it longer, and Coach Collins will talk about this, I'm sure. The changes of the portal and NIL hitting at the same time. It was almost like a storm, just a perfect storm. And it changed the game as far as internally with coaches, how they think. I want to go back to the old days of the booster being engaged in it, into the program. The NIL and the portal has now put all that together, and you're trying to run a good program, as I would say a majority of coaches do. It just puts too much pressure on these guys. And yes, the money is good. I mean, we see a Jimbo who walks away with $75 million. So the money is good, but you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And I think coach just decided I better, at where he is, 60s, going to a place where he can enjoy it and has the ability, both financially and also in terms of the kind of personnel. So I wasn't surprised there, and I'm not surprised of any coach who says, I want to be successful, so maybe I should go someplace where I can enjoy the game, and they have the resources, they have the support. I do believe, and quite quick, and we can talk about it a little later, I do believe the structure that which we see college football today, we won't see. It may be closer to a 32 NFL type program with the heavyweights, because they're the only ones that can survive through these changes.
I agree with you 100% with the structure. I think there's a break coming. There are a lot of schools, and there are schools within this state that are fighting to survive at the Power 5 level and the Group of 5 level, and they're spending way more money than they want to spend to try to stay at that level, because they know the split's coming, and they know there's a chance that they could get left behind and the structure completely changes. As you said, Keith, Chip Kelly moving to Ohio State did not surprise me at all, because Chip was trying to go to the NFL. He was trying to move from UCLA all along, and Bill O'Brien going to Boston College opened up that opportunity for him.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about Sean Elliott, that's a relatively new program at Georgia State. They don't have very much money. You're building a roster for your roster to be, if you do get a good player and you develop a player, he's probably going to last 1 year or 2 years in your program, and then somebody else is going to come in and recruit him. I told Mike this earlier. I'm not sure that we're not looking at those type programs making a deal with some of the haves and saying, hey, help us recruit them. We will develop them, and then if you want them, we'll send them back to you. I don't know if that's feasible, but at the same time, we may be turning some schools into AAA programs just like they do in baseball.
And the thing about that is, especially here in North Carolina, now East Carolina has been at the highest level of college football for a long time, along with Duke and Wake Forest, NC State, and North Carolina. The two newcomers, though, Appalachian State moving up from FCS after years of success and multiple national championships. They're finally in the Sun Belt and are playing in bowl games near every year with head coach Sean Clark. And then you had Biff Poggi over at North Carolina Charlotte. Now, Charlotte is really new to the football scene. They spent a very, very brief time in the FCS before vaulting up into the football bowl subdivision. But both of these places right now, they're having to spend upwards of $500,000 a year just to retain their own rosters. Why would it not make sense for either Appalachian State or Charlotte to just say, we're leaving the conference? We don't need you as a conference. You're not giving me anything as a conference to be able to be competitive at the highest level in the sport of football. I'd rather just go play 8 money games, play on the road, play a national schedule, take the money from that, make my budget whole from what I might miss from 2 extra home games, but it's not going to be that much at those schools, and then use the rest of it for your NIL payroll. That's the only way it seems like, going the old school independent route, that these schools can avoid the fate of being kicked back down to that second or even third tier of college football here in the United States.
Keith, go for it.
Well, I think they all have to do something different. I think we all can agree to that. what that really is, especially for those, I'm going to say under the 32, and we could all come up with the 32 who are the 32 top, programs who could sustain, who could make it happen, who has the recruiting base or has the donor base or has the conferences that really support it. But when you get to those ones who are trying, like the Charlottes and so forth, they can play the money games, but then they're going to lose. And so now you're firing coaches because, everybody wants to win and you're not firing a coach. You're 2-8. Let's say you're 2-9 at Charlotte 2 years in a row. There's going to be pressure on the AD to fire the coach. Mm-hmm. So now this cycle starts over again. So I really don't know, if you begin to say this is who we are, I always equate it to the Ivy League. The Ivy League, they know who they are. I mean, so they, that's what, and so they play and they have successful games. They don't try to get out of their skin and I think maybe those conferences and schools have to say, hey, this is who we are. We're going to have a good conference. We're going to do well. We're going to have our television because as we know, obviously, Mike, in the business, there's inventory. There's a lot of inventory, and there's a lot of time and space that you got to fill, whether it's on television, linear, or whatever. So I do think that it'd be tough for them to do that, to try to just say, forget it. I think they can do it, and I want to use the Ivy League because that's one that's separate off. They do their own thing. They create their own opportunities. And they obviously been successful. They're still around.
I think that's a great way to put it, Keith. When you talk about the Ivy League, they're very content to play 9 games a year, no spring practice, and no scholarships. Basically, it's all need based. And I'm not saying that's the way some schools need to go by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, they do completely understand where they are and what their situation is. And it's whatever the break is, whether it's 32 teams to use the NFL model or it's 40 teams, who knows what that number is going to be. But there's going to be a number out there somewhere. And the thing that we all have to look at as fans and as we move into this is, can you imagine what TV would pay for a 32, 40, or 42 team league for them to play on Saturdays like the NFL or Thursdays? Can you imagine the competition and the amount of money that would be put out there for that group of teams?
It'd be unbelievable. College football, as we've seen in NFL, football is having one of its best years in the history of the NFL. College football is second to that. And the reason college football can't attain that kind of number because it hasn't centralized itself like we're talking about here. If you had these, let's say 30 to 40 teams that are creme de la creme, and they are playing this schedule, it will be at sort of to a level like that. And I do, Jim and Mike, I believe we're headed that way because you look at the Big Ten deal, $1 billion for their TV contract, and SEC's, they haven't redone theirs, but if that's the Big Ten's $1 billion, the SEC is going to be well over $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever the number is. And now the other conferences, I hate to say it, they've lost a lot of ground between the Big 12 and the ACC. Obviously, the Pac-12 is no longer the Pac-12 as we know it. So what do you do if you're those other two and you're not Big Ten or SEC? That's the big question. What happens to those institutions, those teams, and what do they do, and how can they do it? I used to think, my guys, I used to think that, TV wanted to have this, all these different time zones, but after the Big Ten did what, they decided we're going to take that time zone, make it one of ours. So
it really is something that blows the mind. And when you talk about who that select group of schools would be, does that include a Vanderbilt of the SEC? Does that include a Northwestern from the Big Ten? Because even in those conferences, you have the haves and the have-nots. Does a Mississippi State make that jump Does a Purdue? And if those 4 schools aren't around, does that leave entree for a North Carolina, a Clemson, a Florida State, a Miami? I mean, there's a lot of money at stake. And if you're not in that upper group, you're more or less looked at as a second or third tier citizen. That's where I think the real crazy challenge is for those group of 5 schools. And we'll talk more about that later. But specific to these ACC schools right now, huge lawsuit going on in a state that, Keith, you live in, and where you live part-time, Jimmy, the state of Florida, as Florida State University has filed suit against the ACC and vice versa. They've gone back and forth. Look, David Glenn here on the North Carolina Sports Network has been very diligent in putting forth some great factual information. And like he said, sooner or later, this will probably come down to a settlement, but he doesn't see that anytime soon. But when it does, and Florida State gets their freedom, as they most certainly will from the Atlantic Coast Conference. Keith, you know Florida politics. You were the AD at Central Florida. You were the head for the better part of 2 decades of the Orange Bowl Committee. You know a lot of the people in the room, so to speak. It sounds like I'm kind of laying out the outline for Hamilton right here, but how do you look at this, and from maybe a Gator point of view? You played for the Gators, Jimmy. You coached for the Gators. Does Florida even want Florida State in the SEC? Does it mean anything to them in a positive? Right now, they have that recruiting edge over little brother.
I'm going to say they don't need them. I mean, it's not whether Florida State adds anything to the, in my opinion, adds anything to the total package of the SEC. At this point, it does not. I don't see that. There are not going to be more televisions that turn on because of Florida State, because Florida is already getting that. So the only thing I can see, putting on my administrative hat and my, looking at the bottom line, if there's a chance that the Big Ten, let's say, tries to go into your marketplace, now it's a business. It's a business decision. Do I protect my marketplace not to have the competitor to come in and be exposed in my marketplace? That's a different conversation. And I don't know what will happen at that point. All I know is, like you said, Mike, it's going to be a while. No one has to pull any kind of plugs or triggers right now. You let it play itself out. Interesting about the whole Florida State is that I saw the other day where the comeback for the ACC was, well, then you can sell your rights back or something, which is you can buy your rights back, which at the end of the day, okay, buy your rights, and we'll agree to a number, and you can do what you want to do. So I think it's going to be interesting. I understand Florida State's position. I probably wouldn't have taken the kind of act, because at some point you say, damn if you do, damn if you don't. Why would I want someone that the sooner I get them in my conference, and they might want to do the same thing? Mm-hmm. So I just think it's an interesting scenario. But to answer your question, I think practically they don't need them. Florida, I mean, it doesn't help them one way or the other. But from a business, putting on a business hat, if I'm trying to keep someone like the Big Ten, and that's the only one that could possibly, give you any kind of, I would look at it.
That was my first reaction is when this came up. The Gators do not need Florida State. No. They have their footprint. They obviously can move in the direction that they want to move. But the first thing I thought of, and Keith, you brought it up, and you said it very well, is the Big Ten has already moved in on the Pac-12 footprint.
That's right.
The only footprint they don't have a place in right now is in the South.
That's exactly right.
And whether they come as far south as Florida or not, I don't know. But they surely may try to come to North Carolina and South Carolina with their footprint.
Well, Jimmy, let me mention this to you, and I'm sure you know this. There are probably more Big Ten alumni that in the state of Florida than any place else. That whole Tampa area. So it is a viable alternative for a place for them to go, and again, that's why I think the SEC is looking at it. They're weighing it. They're trying to, and they'll let it play out to see if there's a move. And I do believe that that's, whether it's there or North Carolina, I think the Big Ten has had their eyes on them. And I would, if I was in the Big Ten office, I would be looking at those two areas.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
Do you kind of look at the SEC and the Big Ten as an AFC, NFC type of setup, or would you look at maybe that being the case, maybe the Fox conference is the Big Ten, the ESPN conference is the SEC, and then each one of those networks take either the Big 12 or the ACC, suck them in, and then they just play this thing and take some of these undesirable schools. I'm not picking on Starkville, but nobody wants to go to Starkville. Okay? Nobody does. I mean, nobody really wants to go to Auburn, but it's not that far away from Atlanta. But all kidding aside, doesn't it really come down to what the people at the Disney Corporation and at Fox want to do? Because it's nothing to do with the NCAA. It's really nothing to do with ADs or college presidents. It really does come down. And Keith, you've been in these rooms. You've negotiated these deals just like I have. Doesn't it really come down to what the TV folks want? Because if they wanted to put this in order, they could. It's like they want to drive it down to where it's in such a desperate position that it's going to be more affordable and people are more willing to accept their draconian terms, which will come, in my opinion, and then they're going to get a bargain, which is what college football has always been to them. It's a cash cow because it just doesn't take that much. They don't have to pay for any labor, and they don't have to worry about the residual rights. I mean, to me, it's all a big TV play, and we're just all waiting on somebody at Disney or at Fox to decide what they want to do.
Well, that's been happening for years. I mean, ESPN has been controlling college, sports for years now. And just recently you had NBC take a swap, and they've been in and out. CBS has been in and out. So I think you're right, Mike. I strongly believe in what Jimmy said. There was going to be this NFC, AFC type of, two. I mean, let's face it, they're the two dominant conferences right now. And they control most of the conference championships, most of the national just comes from those two conferences in most sports. So there are a lot of schools, as we all know, that have been in multiple conferences. So for Mississippi State to not be in the SEC, I mean, it's not going to be, and it's what's going to be best. And I don't think there will be any, if you can't produce something, if that's something you can't fit within that framework, I think that's where they're headed because the money is so great now. I mean, $220 million plus for an athletic department. There are a lot of corporations in America that don't generate that kind of revenue. So, and so I think and going back, I think the conversations and even this past, it's over the head of presidents, how big this enterprise has gotten, and it will continue to be that way because there's got to be a stopping place between high school and the pros in football, particularly football. In basketball, you can, that's why you can have everybody play basketball. You have 99, 20, 200. But football is, the levels are really, really, really different. So that's my take on it. And I think, again, as you said, the ACC, Florida State, it will be a long time. Hopefully they'll settle it because it doesn't do anyone any good just drag it out, get to a point, get it over with, and do what you need to do.
One of the other things that you brought up right there, and I didn't plan on getting into this, but boy, it's just too big of a stake to avoid, is you talk about the campus leaders, chancellors and presidents. I worked for 3 different university presidents and sat on their cabinets, and to say that each of the 3 were a different animal would be an understatement of epic proportions. Just like probably coaches and administrators, everybody is their own person. But when you talk about a college administrator, president, chancellor, being out of their depth when it comes to this, well, to me, that's the understatement of the year. But it really does go to the fact that nowhere else on the planet Earth, in no other conference, in no other country, in no other society, do they put athletics as part of the educational system the way that we do in the United States of America. So what would it take to just say, hey, we're going to quit putting athletics on college campuses and making these kids go to school and all this? We're just going to license out the name, image, and likeness of the University of North Carolina or the Florida Gators. We'll put you in our uniforms. We'll put you in all stuff, and we'll market ourselves. You can even play on our campuses, but now you pay us and set those up as individual businesses. And now you don't have to worry about, sorry, field hockey, the field hockey coach saying we deserve to get paid too, because they're not the same thing. They are not a business. Sorry, it's just not the case. Nobody wants to say that has a job in intercollegiate athletics, because they'll be overwhelmed by negativity. But Keith, you and I, we've been ADs and we know it. Nobody cares about those sports enough to sustain them as their own businesses. If you truly ran it like a business, there would probably be 4 sports at every school, and everything else could be a club sport, just like ice hockey is at North Carolina and at NC State. And they do pretty well, and those kids have a great experience. But to me, it just seems like it's so out of whack. While we're talking about just making it work for football, why don't we look at the whole and just quit this charade that these are college students? Because I got to tell you, save for West Point, where I worked, I can't tell you that academics was in the top 3 priorities of anybody when it came to the student athletes. Now, I'm not saying they're bad people for that. That's just why they were hired to be there, to run the athletics department, not to make sure that Johnny or Janie, were getting ready for the next thing in life. No matter how many PSAs they run during March Madness, people are worried about winning games, not the other part. At least that's my role. Am I wrong, guys?
I'm going to say this: as you move into that type of structure, Mike, not every player that obviously plays at a high level of college football is capable of sustaining that over a long period of time. Right. So the educational factor has to be still involved somewhere in there, in my opinion. Now, how the educational factor would come into that type of structure, I obviously have no idea. But at the same time, and Keith, you said this, that for the elite high school player, they are capable in basketball of transitioning into a professional league. Mm-hmm. But to think for 1 second that a 18, 19-year-old young man could play pro football on a high level, it's just, it would have to be just an unbelievable mountain to climb. So I think we're going to continue to need the college structure to build this thing on. But I think we're also going to look at that it could be supplemented in a different way and become a business structure. But I still think they're going to have to go to school within that structure.
I think it's going to be a combination, and we were fortunate, Jimmy. We worked at University of Florida. It's its own entity. It's an own corporation. I think you're going to see more of those. If you generate the money that you spend on your program, you pay for the university, and you get. I think there'll be something. They'll because you're right. And I say this, and I don't say this against universities, but most people who work for the university itself, they don't worry about generating revenue.
Right.
Because the revenue comes from tuition, scholarship money, the state or whatever. But athletics, like at University of Florida, you had to sell tickets, sell sponsorships, TV rights. And so the job of an athletic administrator is sitting here, how are we going to get this money? They don't worry about that at a university. If the state doesn't allocate it, then they just cut some stuff, So I think that model of creating your own athletic association, if you want to call it, it'd be something that will be very much part of this whole thing. You have to be the money that we get from television, the money that we get, we all be able to sustain it. And I agree, Jim. I think the educational aspect, because we spent so much energy and so much of telling John Q. Public that these are student athletes, and they've got this ingrained that these are student athletes. But we didn't tell them about the part that, the NILs and all that kind of stuff. But now they've said, okay, that I think they should earn some NIL money. The more I think about it, the more I said earlier, I just believe that we're headed to a breakaway of those who are at that certain level. And you also just mentioned about the Vanderbilts. All to see Vanderbilt, Rice, and all those other high academic, private schools, where at Wake, the Ivy Leagues have been doing it for years. So the Northwesterns, they can't sustain it on a year-to-year basis at the level that we're talking about. And at some point, if you're sitting there and you're generating a lot of money into this entity, and someone who's not, you're going to ask that question whether you really want to or not. You're going to say, well, they're not. They're getting all the same money I'm getting, but yet still, I'm the one that's obviously going to the bowl games, this and that, and the other, to generate that.
That's interesting. You bring up the University Athletic Association, Keith, and a lot of people have no idea that the University of Florida takes absolutely no state funds to run their athletic programs, whereas that school in Tallahassee makes a living off state funds.
Yes.
And I was working there when Doak Campbell Stadium was redone, and state funds were used to redo Doak Campbell Stadium. And there are classrooms within Doak Campbell Stadium for that reason and that reason only, so they could use state funds.
Yes, that was a brilliant move. But yeah, that is a fact, and it makes a difference. So, if you're going to get this kind of money, then you've got to create this to where you're not taken away from the educational side. And, it'll take a while to do it, but I think that's where they're headed. I believe that's the only way they're going to survive. Those who can be in that league or be that, it can be at the table, will eventually be there. The conferences may move around, may shift a little bit. That's good. It's good for the game. Because most people who watch the sports, how many of them really know anything about the university's academic programs anyway? Very few. I mean, they might know Florida's a good school, a good academic school, but you say, well, do you know about that? Oh, no, they have one of those? I didn't know, but I know they got a good football team. So it's not one of those things where, that's the thing that's being showcased. And I know the presidents want to do that, and athletics gives them a chance to do it.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Rick George is the director of athletics at the University of Colorado. He hired Deion Sanders, and Coach Prime went through the past season. He's been on Amazon Prime. He's Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year. He went 4-8 and finished dead last in the final year of Pac-12 football. But, he is still the guy. And one of the things that I found very interesting is people have been talking about Colorado Buffs football 2024 is about Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback, and how he could be, the highest rated player in the new EA Sports college football game, or he could be this, or he could be that. The one thing that led me to my earlier standpoint about academics and the future of athletics is that Shedeur Sanders has never been in a classroom at the University of Colorado. He takes all of his classes online. And it just seems like from the days when you guys were playing at Elon in Florida and I was playing at Guilford, where they were just glad if I showed up and my check cleared, because that's how I got to play. Yeah. But now the academic part of this has been devalued so much. Yeah. And the kids are more worried about, they're not worried about if their credits are going to transfer. They're not worried if they're going to be able to get their major that they want. They just want to get paid, because that's the mindset of today. Jimmy and I know of one player who played in the ACC, who then went to play in the SEC and then transferred to the Big Ten, and now he's playing wherever UNLV is. I mean, he's on his fourth school in less than 13 months. The kid didn't play a down of college football last year, and he's going to make over $250,000 a year to play where he's going to play this year. People will pay for whatever. And I've even uncovered some other stuff that I'm learning as the more and more coaches and administrators I talk to. And the one frustration that they have is, we're doing all of these support services for college athletes. And you talk about what fans really don't know. It's what all those people in the athletics department are doing to keep these characters eligible. I mean, repeating classes, going through academic tutors, their nutritional tutors, their life skills people. These kids are no more prepared for the real world because they've been mollycoddled and manhandled and babied their entire careers. Now, you're going to have the outliers, okay, the Dwayne Carters, the Peyton Wilsons, the Cedric Graves, who are doing it all, the true Renaissance guys. These are guys, Keith, that play at Duke and NC State and North Carolina that Jimmy and I talk about all year. But a lot of these kids, they're worried about getting that car payment, getting a good place to live, as many online classes as I can get, and will you throw in an Xbox and a subscription to where I don't have to pay for games anymore, and I want all my food delivered to me from Olive Garden. It's crazy. And that's on top of the Pell Grant, the cost of attendance, the room and board that they're not living on campus. They're going to get that check cut. Some of these kids were already making $30,000 a year tax-free, and there aren't a lot of employees at these schools, especially the big schools in Gainesville and Chapel Hill and Raleigh and Athens, Georgia, and, wherever, that are making that. You have a lot of housekeepers, a lot of maintenance people that are not making salaries for that. And that's where, I mean, if I was an administrator that wasn't involved with athletics on a college campus right now, I'd be livid that my campus administration is spending so much time on something that's supposedly an extracurricular that's making a mockery of my academic setting. And that's probably not going to change. I mean, just from what we've talked about here in the last 40 minutes, there is so much to change. It almost makes me just want to do a LeBron and throw my hands up and watch the smoke fall down, because it's a freaking mess. And nobody has the balls to take it on. I mean, the conference commissioners don't. The ADs are hamstrung because they're not even in charge of their own campus. Yeah. They're having to educate somebody on a daily basis that has no clue of what's going on. I mean, it's an Ann Sullivan type of educational process for a lot of these people in athletics, and it's driving a lot of them straight into retirement.
Well, unfortunately, Mike, you wrapped up everything all in one, because
you did.
The state of college athletics today it's tough. It's really, I mean, based on everything you said, you put that times 2. And we have no fault but our own, those who are in it.
No doubt.
We allow things to get away because we didn't address them. We thought it was someone else's job. We were okay with what we were doing. We don't want to change it. And, the NIL, I go back quite quickly. And in 2006, I sat on the NIL committee. 2006.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
okay, to talk about it. That was on an NCAA committee. There were 79 people in the room. So you know what they say, you don't want anything done, you put a big group together. And that's what happened. Nothing happened until, and of course, then I said you had the NIL, then you had the transfer portal, which they didn't know was going to hit at the same time. It just made it worse. And then the NCAA, in my opinion, just said, hey, look, we're tired of fighting all these legal battles and fights. You know, look, let's let somebody else. Change in leadership, things hit the fan. Now it's at a point where we can't put that genie back in the bottle because no one really wants to. They don't know what to do.
You know what, Keith, I'll bring this up about the NCAA is there's also that little thing called tax exempt status with the NCAA, and they're gonna protect what the NCAA is as a football coach's opinion.
Right.
The NCAA is the NCAA basketball tournament. That's what they are, because they control very little of what happens in college football at this point in time.
That's true.
You guys are administrators, and they have zero piece of the college football playoff.
Right.
So they all they're doing is, and it's just like the Florida State deal now with the violation in recruiting with NIL. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous at this point in time. That's the other reason that we don't bring up, or people in this society don't understand, is the haves are tired of the have-nots having a vote in what happens to their $220 million programs, and they're barely $50 million programs, but yet they're voting on what affects me. That's the other reason this break is going to happen.
I agree with that. I agree strongly.
Keith, it was right at the end of your tenure at UCF when I was just starting as the director of athletics at Towson. I remember going into the 2011 or 2012 NCAA convention. And Towson University, of the then Colonial Athletic Association, had the same voting power as the University of Central Florida or the University of Florida.
That's right.
And I went in, the proposal, one of the proposals maybe that you talked about in your small group, was to pay a $2,500 stipend to all of the 100% scholarship kids, football, men's and women's basketball, and volleyball. Everybody else is on a partial.
Yeah.
Most fans don't even know that.
Right.
So I voted against it. And I was questioned by Seth Davis, then of Sports Illustrated, who is a native of Maryland, who went to the Bullis School and then came to Durham to go to Duke University. It fits Seth to a T. All of the things that go along with both of those schools. I mean, he embodies their spirit quite well. And he said to me, how dare you cast a vote against this? Don't you care about kids? And why should Towson have a say-so at the same stuff that Duke does anyway, or Maryland? And I said, because it's dumb. Because what they should have done is bad politics. Mm-hmm. What they should have done is say, we're going to give the money to everybody else except for the 100% kids. And everybody would go, well, what about these kids? They're making all the money. They get nothing. Okay, I'll give you $5,000. I double what it's cost. Everybody gets out of this for $5.5 million, and you keep the structure going.
Right.
But because, Keith, like you said, you sit in these meetings and nobody wants to do anything at all because they're afraid. As one associate AD told me at the University of Illinois, hey, that's a great idea, but I'm only 4 years away from retirement and I get full medical, so I'm not doing a damn thing. So that's why when you look in these staff directories, you have these characters that just stay here forever, and we got a coach to hire. I left the 404. Hey, Daniel, hire me a coach and be my shield against the FOIA laws.
Yes.
You lazy sons of guns.
Yes.
Nobody wants to do anything, and that's why if I get a little hyper about it, it's that I sit here and I do thank whatever power is in the heavens that I don't have to be in that lineup anymore, because there's nothing worse than trying to be a solutions-oriented person and work in college athletics. They're just skating along right now. And it's tough because we have a lot of friends between the three of us who are outstanding professionals
Yes.
who truly want to bring things. And if they try something that is not part of the normal lexicon, they are attacked, they are vilified, they are stoned in broad daylight. And we're not talking about the good stone. We're talking about the hard, aggressive, bleeding kind.
Yes.
And it's very frustrating.
It is.
It's the most stunning thing that we could talk about. We talked for a good long time right here. It's KEITH TRIBBLE, Jim Collins, and myself, Mike Waddell. This is the North Carolina Sports Network and a special off-season edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. Jimmy will join me from time to time whenever we feel the spirit within us to bubble up and bring smart people like Keith in. But guys, any closing thoughts as we get ready now for spring football and more lawsuits and more TV deals that are coming down the pike? What's a prediction that either one of you have between now and the start of football season that you feel may come to pass that might not be on the tip of everybody's brain?
I'll let you go, Coach.
Keith, I think the big thing that's going to happen as we move forward in college athletics is that the size of staffs now at the have programs are so large and so consuming at this point in time. And where we are now, we actually have general managers in college football at this point in time. There are a lot of programs out there, just like the NFL, that the general manager is making the decisions on the personnel. And there are head coaches in college football right now that make very few personnel decisions at this point in time. And when I say personnel decisions, I'm saying who's on their coaching staff and who is on their team in general, because there's so many things out there in the recruiting process that are just hard to deal with. And I'm talking about transfer portal and NIL. You spend all your time trying to keep your roster rather than losing. When you're losing them, when you look at the halves, and I'm talking about the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Michigans, the Ohio States, et cetera, and there's many more halves out there than that. Roster management is the big thing right now, and I think the next big thing that's going to happen is the second transfer portal period that happens in April. It'll be interesting to see what happens during that time.
So, Coach, I sort of agree with you. I think everything evolves around football and the structure of football. And it's going to be more NFL-like, with transfer portals or drafts or able to trade somebody. That's what transfer portals are. And it's going to be interesting to see what these universities do. I do believe between the SEC and the Big Ten, and there will be those two entities that will be left, and how big they get with who else joins them will happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And everybody else will be playing for, the good old university. You see it. Everything that's happening now is real structured to where they can maximize their revenue opportunity. As Jim said, basketball is basketball. They already did their thing anyway. So I just think that change is going to come to college athletics. And also there are going to be a lot of folks that all of us know, especially you and I, Mike, that will be retiring or getting out of the game.
That's KEITH TRIBBLE along with Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell, and this has been your special February off-season edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. We'll see you again soon as we try to keep some sense into what's going on in college athletics, and specifically the sport that the three of us and you love, college football. So long.